it seemed like no matter what points were raised about particular failures of Donald Trump, one thing that you ended all your interviews with, Josiah, was, is there anything that could change your mind and cause you to vote for anyone other than Donald Trump? And all of them very firmly and resolutely, confidently, put their chins up and said, no, there's nothing that can change my mind, nothing at all. So even if it's the case that they would accept that Donald Trump wants to suspend the Constitution, even if we could make the case and they would agree that Donald Trump is the ultimate authoritarian threat in this country, it seems like that's what they want. So, sorry, I know this is long, but it seems like we're finally at the point where we have to make the case, and I want you guys to sell me, so what? What's wrong with authoritarianism? What's so great about democracy? What's so great about our system? Why do we need to convince people that it's worth saving, worth keeping?
Authoritarianism sucks because just look at the countries that it produces. Like the United States has been the leader of the free world for at least the past 80 years, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that it happens to be that we organize ourselves under democratic principles, that we're capable of making great social change, incorporating lots of different types of people and ideas into our economy, into our society, that we're able to mobilize a ton of different factions of society in ways that other countries can't. Like all of this can only happen in a democratic regime, in a democratic form of government, where you can look at how people vote, you can track changes in government, you can track public opinion. You know, if somebody were to say, what does America feel about the war in Ukraine? What does America feel about Israel? What does America feel about whatever? You can look at our elections, you can look at our primaries, and you can tell. If I were to ask you, what does the average Russian citizen think about something? That's a whole project to figure out. What does the average Chinese citizen think about a thing? That's very difficult to figure out because you've got your single party, you've got your single leaders, you've got what they say, and who knows what the public opinion is on a thing. And then when you look at all the different types of people and peoples that get incorporated into, I think, liberal democracies, you can just see like cool things that you don't really see in other countries. You know, one example I brought up was, you know, on Fresh and Fit, arguing with a bunch of guys who argued for some weird caliphate or whatever, that they wanted to rule the United States. You know, I'm sitting next to Myron, who's like I think descendant of a Sudanese immigrant. You've got Sneeko, who, you know, I think his dad came from Haiti. You've got me, my mom came from Cuba. You've got Fresh. I don't know where his parents come from. Fresh is a guy. But like it's like the fact that we're all doing this podcast here on like a high rise in like Miami is just, it's such a cool, unique American thing, and a uniquely American thing. And I think that the conditions for these things to be created for foreigners to come into this country and to explore, you know, society or capitalism or business in the way that they want, I just think that's really uniquely American. I think it was JJ, or it might have been somebody else that gave me this quote, but one of the cool things about America, and I really believe this, despite all of our flaws, I think America allows you to be the best version of yourself better than any other country would allow.
That's what I was going to say, all of that.
Did you like that quote, Stephen?
Did it come from you?
Yeah, I was going to say if you liked it, it came from me, but no, I think it came from JJ.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that was an excellent, excellent answer, Adam. Thank you very much for that contribution.
No problem.
That's one perspective. The other perspective about Elon Musk allows mis and disinformation. I think many people hold the perspective that Elon Musk is not being the arbiter of what is the truth and what is mis and disinformation. If it's all allowed, then he's not the one in charge of deciding what is or is not truth. Do you think there's any merit to that?
There is absolutely no thing that you participate in life where you're trying to sort noise from accurate signal where more signal or more noise is helpful. And it's a whole other conversation about like freedom of speech and these kind of like epistemic values that lead you in like good information gathering directions. But I think people have this really bad notion that if you want the truth to rise to the top, you just need more speech. Freedom of speech is great. We just need more speech and more speech and more speech. And that's just not true. It's not true anywhere. And the noise and the mess of what exists right now on the internet, especially in places like X, where people can lie with impunity, including the owner, who is now shamelessly in full support of, you know, Donald Trump, who probably lies more than any politician person I've ever seen in my entire life. And this is in the same universe where Santos exists. It's absolutely insane. And I think people, I don't know what the conversation could even begin to look like, because when I say, you know, like misinformation is a huge problem online, conservatives and Democrats will both cheer and applaud for exactly the opposite reason. So there's something that we're going to have to do to approach and change how we sort through like what exists online, what's allowed to exist online, or how people are allowed to propagate information online, because the current environment is never going to produce something good for democracy, I don't think.
Especially with AI.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it. It was either Matt Beat or Huey, but they talked about how essentially democracies are destroyed by like divisive realities and mistrusting one another and like misinfo, whereas authoritarian regimes are built up and reinforced by these systems, right? And so I think probably lots of people have seen like Ryan Macbeth on Twitter being like, at some point, like misinfo Russian like bots and stuff, like, are these considered like armed combatants to some degree? Because it's so destructive for a democracy to create a reality where you can't trust your neighbor and you don't even live in the same world where Democrats are now like creating hurricanes to hit Georgia and stuff. Like how do you even begin to wrestle with ideas in a democratic way?
Well, I was asking the Trump supporters yesterday. I have a bunch of clips of this. I go, would you rather vote for Kamala Harris or Vladimir Putin? A lot of them said Putin. I said the same thing with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un or Kamala Harris. A lot of them said, I'd stay home. I said, what if you're the tie-breaking vote? They said, I can't vote for Kamala. How much do you think Vladimir Putin is salivating when he sees that he waged an invisible war, essentially, without wasting any money on ground troops? And he has tricked half of our population with the help of Donald Trump into thinking all of this, that Vladimir Putin would be a better leader than Kamala Harris.
I mean, what was the quote? Wasn't there a quote leak recently where Donald Trump was looking at Kim and he said, like, when he rises or when he does whatever, his people clap.
I want my people to do that.
my people to do that. Well, yeah.
Well, like when he was president, he talked to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and DoD officials. He's like, what about military parades, which is stuff that they do in communist countries? It's absolutely insane. But on that, kind of piggybacking off what Adam just said, this is why, for those of you who've like heard me occasionally in Steve and Stream ask the question, and it is Socratic. It's like, if we experienced, God forbid, some sort of like terrorist event on a Democrat's watch, would Republicans rally around a Democratic president? If you recall, those of you who were around during 9/11, the expectation was if you're a Democrat, you shut the bleep up and you just rally behind the Republican. It doesn't matter what the policy differences are. That was the expectation. I am convinced, as I imagine many of you are, that in a counterfactual where it happens under a Democrat, you would not get that support from Republican, not just Republican voters, but Republican politicians. They would use it as an opportunity to undermine the Democratic president, and that's an asymmetry that we have to really push back on.
I do want to say that despite the fact that it has just objectively gotten just way crazier in the last 6-8 years in terms of misinformation, confusion, obfuscation, the liberal coalition in this country is doing a really good job. For the last 6 years, it's been sustained wins. I'm optimistic about this November, and it's in no small part because of people like you participating. So give yourself a round of applause once again for doing that. It's important, it matters, good job.
All right, Hutch fishing for the claps. I see where you're at. I see what you're doing. Okay. But we all agree that people lie on social media, and that's the biggest confusion because everybody calls everybody a liar. We see the no-use strategy, right? Donald Trump, I believe, tried to coup the government and steal the election in 2020. And what happened? Joe Biden endorsed Kamala Harris. We didn't do a primary. What's the word that popped up out of conservatives' mouths?
Coup.
They call it a coup. It's ridiculous. There's no comparison. But that's the strategy. And to the uninitiated, how do you even start to tell the truth? We agree that people lie, and that's where the confusion starts. But what do you do about that? What are the solutions?
I think it has to start in the media, whether that's people hosting debates, whether that's media officials covering like events. I think in the beginning, people were a little bit scared about coming off as too unhinged about Donald Trump. Well, in the very beginning, it was funny. People said, we have to be careful we don't normalize this. But then in the media's I guess, quest for legitimacy, they stopped criticizing Trump because they were worried that they were coming off as too unhinged. And somehow conservatives managed to get a grapple on the entire narrative on the liberal side as well. And I think that people in media need to be less afraid of calling out the insanity on the conservative side and just hardcore fixating on that. Like, you can't make concessions anymore to these insane people. Like, you have to be willing to lay, like, in a fact-based world and to just stick there. Like, if you want to have conversations, I was talking earlier with Josiah, if you want to have conversations about, like, the FEMA response and everything going on for the hurricane, well, let's start with some quotes from Republican governors about Biden's response. Do you acknowledge that these quotes are real? Like, before you even move on to any crazy thing about Biden, suiting up like Iron Man to block helicopters from rescuing people, like, it needs to be like a grounded in reality conversation, because conservatives are just completely and totally in another dimension right now.
I mean, you say that, but the media is everything. You can, if there's a narrative that you want or that you like, there is media out there that showcases that and that will obfuscate, that will refuse to cover a story and will hyper-focus and create their own narrative for any piece of information that's out there.
Deport them.
I mean, we can't have that, right? In fact, don't clap for that. I mean, whatever. You can clap for whatever you want, but
I think there are some
no,
basic
don't
things.
clap for that. I command you.
I think there are basic things that
authoritarian.
need to happen on media that I think could change. One, I think that there should be law. I think that nationalities should be forced to be shown for accounts that are operating on social media in the United States that do media reporting. Like if you follow 10 accounts for news and this law passes and you find out that 9 out of 10 of those accounts are run by foreign nationals, I think that's important information that's important for an American to know. I think there are other steps that you could take in that direction. I think that income sources should be disclosed from people that are doing major media in the United States. I think it's insane that you've got people that are earning millions of dollars from who knows what companies that are just like blatantly lying to the American public. I think that there are steps that you can take to move in that direction, but we need like a culture change like as well in terms of how we deal with misinformation online.